are now tuned in to the Wisco Weekly Experience.
Mabuhay, bienvenidos, vitete, vukamen, and welcome to Wisco Weekly. This is the podcast that we're giving you university education on the automotive and mobility space. I'm your host, Dennis Wisco. I'm alongside my good friend, co-host, dystopian writer, punk band, bass player, Mr. Rudy Salo.
Hey, good afternoon. You know what? I've been on many shows with you now, and I've never asked you about the intro music. Is that something that you've cut yourself? Is there a DJ Wisco that's out there, or where'd you get that from?
It's part genius on my part in terms of my Mozart kind of autistic brain and kind of the savant in me mixed with fiber.
So you own the rights to that?
I own the rights to that.
So
you don't have to worry, Mr. Attorney. You're good to go. Good for God's sake.
You knew where I was going with that. When I was at UCLA, I was actually a radio DJ, and the show that we were on was we used to do electronic music back in the late 90s, and this was before the explosion of EDM and the popularity of it. And so I was really into the scene for a while, and it's pretty good stuff. I just wanted to commend you on it.
Thank you.
I meant to do that before.
It's meant to induce alpha waves. That's actually kind of the neuroscience part about what I was trying to accomplish with that. It's supposed to enhance alpha waves, then to beta waves, and just get people alert. That was the intent.
It does that.
Rudy, do you remember the Ford City of Tomorrow event?
I do. I remember it very well. It was in the Arts District of downtown Los Angeles. It was a blast.
Can you tell me what happened at that affair in which we had awkwardly were acting like high school journalists, like two buffoons recording something, and then there was something that happened?
I can recall with some embarrassment because, as you know, I'm not a big fan of recording ourselves when we're doing this thing, and we decided to record a video. And lo and behold, just maybe 10 feet away from us, somebody asked, "Are you guys recording a video? What are you guys? What are you guys actually doing?"
Right, like in this tone that was like, "What the hell are these amateurs doing?"
Yeah, very much so. Very much. We were number one. It was very amateurish. Number two,
very amateur. She was kind.
We looked probably ridiculous, and she took pity on us by even acknowledging that we stood there. She's probably the only person that ever even watched that video. And we went over, we introduced ourselves. She told us who she was. She told us she was from Pittsburgh. And then here's the ridiculous thing about that whole thing. I was like, "Oh, you're from Pittsburgh." I was recently talking with a company that I advised, Tip Tags. I made an introduction of them to this company based out of Pittsburgh called Roadbotics. Have you ever heard of them? Oh. And she looked at me like I was an idiot because I must have sounded like an idiot. She's like, "Yeah, I founded that company."
Right.
That's how the conversation went.
And your 6'3" figure felt like you were 3'6".
Yes, I felt very small and stupid.
Well, Rudy, imagine, let's pivot a little bit here.
Sure.
Imagine a bike messenger and their responsibilities of delivering goods to people.
I think there was a Kevin Bacon movie in the 80s where he was a bike messenger. Yes, okay, so I'm thinking of that.
These bike messengers, who have been around since the late 1800s, encounter all sorts of varying work-related scenarios day to day, trip to trip.
Very dangerous.
Remember, their office are the streets of New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, Pittsburgh, and many other metropolitan areas.
Street people.
There aren't a whole lot of bike messengers in this world, but like any niche subculture, they are fanatical down to their core.
Fanatic street people. Okay, I'm imagining these things.
One of my favorite YouTube videos of all time is entitled "Bike Messengers Are on Crack," and it showcases a race called the Alley Cat Race, which are a band of misfit bike messengers racing throughout the streets of Manhattan. They're lane splitting, sometimes with the flow of traffic or against traffic. They hang on to the rears of cars traveling at 30 miles per hour. Bike messengers are, as my man Charlie Murphy says, habitual line steppers. But you need to be a habitual line stepper in order to get something done. You need to line step when you are tasked with delivering a good to a customer. Rudy, you and I are the end customer, and we don't really care how the product gets to us as long as it gets to us.
Amen.
Our guest today was a former bike messenger. she peddled tiny freight around the city of Pittsburgh. What's more, take the habitual line stepper and give her education. Our guest is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and then continued her education at MIT Sloan School of Management and Carnegie Mellon University. She is heavily involved in the connected autonomous vehicle space, be it with Pennsylvania DOT, ITS, the Intelligent Transportation Society, and other local community organizations. She's been documented going against the flow of traffic with her TEDx Pittsburgh talk, where she challenged the way that we need to think about autonomous vehicles in our societies. Currently, she enables startups, communities, and governments to radically transform mobility through her consulting firm called the Ehrlichman Group. Here to discuss universal basic mobility and the movement of goods, men, women, and children, please welcome to the show the academic, the habitual line stepper, Miss Courtney Ehrlichman. Hello, Courtney. Welcome to Wisco Weekly.
Thanks for having me, guys. I just want to say, I think you got that story wrong of how we met, because I remember Rudy saying something about you were recording your video and you were saying it was terrible music in the background. And I said, that's Thelonious Monk. What are you talking about?
Oh, you're right.
That's actually interesting to hear your perspective on it, because our perspective was like we are acting like two buffoons trying to record something, and like we're embarrassing ourselves in front of this woman who's doing some serious work, and yet you are actually hearing the music.
And this is a part of the theme of me being a music snob. Courtney. So I'm not surprised that I said Thelonious Monk was garbage, because I am a music snob, and we did talk about music that day. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But we did look like buffoons, correct? I mean, let's just be honest.
No, I mean, when you said that you were you knew a company in Pittsburgh called Robotics, I didn't think that I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, yeah, I founded it. So and I ended up we ended up connecting with tip tags, and so thank you. It was great to meet you there, and that was also a really fun event. And
it was.
You were the highlight of that event. I must admit,
it really was.
Meeting you. We really appreciate it. Now we have you on our show.
Well, so Courtney, actually, before we begin, how can people follow you?
Well, I am on Twitter at @C_Ehrlichman. If you can spell that, it's EHRLICHMAN, or you can just Google me, Courtney Ehrlichman. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Okay. And listeners, I will put her contact information on the episode page. Well, Courtney, we have a lot of things that we want to talk to you about today, and a lot of, one particular topic that I'm hoping that you will enlighten us with. But, I think one of the things that's most important is to really get an understanding of who Courtney Ehrlichman is. And so I thought the first question that we can really get inside your head would be if you can tell us, what is it at this moment that you would like to accomplish with your time that is most meaningful to you? Well, the one thing I think that sort of is the umbrella over all of my work, advocacy, and what drives me personally is that everyone can get to where they need to go, and everyone has equal access. So that falls under the umbrella of universal basic mobility. One thing that I've been discovering is that, 50% of the population that is moving around is women. And this cuts across every socioeconomic level, ethnicity, political background. Just 50% of the population is women. Like, that's just a statistic globally. Now, I also learned that, and it's obvious to me, being a woman now and a mother, that moving around on the streets, the roads have really been designed for, one, just the traditional male commute, like the Leave It to Beaver, 9 to 5, get to your job, get home, commute. Or the moving military from one coast to the other as fast as possible. And what that left out was the actual pattern of everyone else, which include elderly people, children, and, women. And women typically are the caretakers of those two sub demographics. So for me, it's really about addressing all the gaps in mobility and creating a frictionless system for everybody. Everybody. I just feel like if we could solve the transportation issues that women face, it's not only an economic opportunity, but it's solving 50% of the problem. And
go ahead, Rudy.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about those issues actually on the show. To just to touch upon a couple of the things that you brought up there, Courtney. As you know, and we know, the explosion of micro-mobility options that are out there today with all primarily scooters. I mean, there are some e-bike programs out there as well, but the vast majority of people that are using those solutions are not elderly, are not children, are not mothers who are moving children around. You know, the transportation gaps from the transit systems or even the bus systems, those large gaps that are in cities like Los Angeles or communities like in Orange County are still not being addressed to the point where everybody can use them. I mean, I completely appreciate that 100%. And I also believe, look, some public transit, some women and children and elderly don't feel safe on it. Right. That's another thing.
There was just a report that came out of this NYU, and we actually used that as part of my argument for the City of Tomorrow project, that in New York City, there's a large portion of the female population that doesn't feel safe on transit.
Absolutely. There's a large portion of females that don't feel safe on public transit in San Francisco using the BART or in Los Angeles. I mean, I use it because I'm a large male, but that's not, I mean, I'm not everybody. There's a large segment of the population that don't feel safe. So I totally agree with you. So also just one more thing that I want to throw out there. I know several women, clients, friends, family that refuse to use the other new option these days of ride sharing, Uber and Lyft. Right. They don't want to use it. Yeah. They don't feel safe on it.
My wife is the same way. Yeah. She does not feel comfortable using Uber herself. Yeah. If it's just going to be her going from wherever it is, if it's a short distance or especially if it's longer distance.
Yeah. So that's also something that needs to be addressed in my opinion as well.
Courtney, I think one thing that is interesting of that you said, and I hope that we can you can describe this a little bit more. So you mentioned that the more or less the infrastructure was not taking the woman in consideration, especially given the fact that women are the caretakers of elderly. Traditionally elderly people. Well, I would still say till this day. I mean, like when you were talking about that, Courtney, what I was thinking of were a lot of Filipino nurses, and so I know Filipino nurses. There's a vast number of them that take care of the elderly, and so I'm in my head though. I'm thinking about though. When you say that the infrastructure does not accommodate or was not built with the woman in mind, can you maybe further elaborate on like what that means?
Yeah.
Sure, and I would actually rephrase that to say that our road infrastructure, our street infrastructure, was not designed with the non-traditional commute really in mind, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how the other parts of the population, caretakers, mothers, people that are doing elder care, how they're moving around. They're going to the grocery store, they're going to the pharmacy, they're going to doctor's appointments, they're dropping children off at daycare, taking them to activities, taking them to their friend's house, walking them down the street, getting school supplies. That's called trip chaining. So they're not going from, the office and back. They're going across all these little parts. And we've seen the downfall of Main Street, and it's coming back. And I'm really glad about that. But we're also we're having this land use pattern with retail that still is prioritizing cars through their district. I live right on a main corridor here, and the road real estate that we have given or permissed to vehicles is astounding. There's a bike lane. It's not a protected bike lane. So I am stuck in the conundrum as someone who is, a fanatic about cycling. My daughter has sort of outgrown, sitting on my cargo tail. She's she's 11, 70 pounds. But I don't feel safe having her ride on the road.
This is
you
exactly
need to get a tandem bike. That's what you need. Your daughter should be contributing to work.
We've talked about this, Dennis.
But you can't respond. You can't respond quickly to issues on the road with a tandem bike. Yeah, I mean that's coming from the bike messenger sort of racing angle or geometry. The geometry of a tandem concerns me more. I will tell you, on my cargo long tail, there would be cars making turns that weren't expecting that long tail to be there.
Right.
And that's just not okay.
For the past 70 years, the primary focus of our infrastructure in this country has been focused on one thing and one thing only. I've said this before, and I'm not coming up with anything new. The primary thing that we've been focusing on is personal vehicles, tying into what Courtney has been saying about the traditional male mode of infrastructure. Men previously in the past 70 years, that's changed thankfully over the last 25 to 30 years. Men were driving their personal vehicles to work and from work, period.
Or that was just defined, as she clarified, as the traditional way of moving around.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And that's what we've been arguing for here, and I argue for as an infrastructure finance attorney, is rethinking the future of our infrastructure and the future of our communities so it's all inclusive, to not just focus on the personal vehicle.
So then, Courtney, this takes you to universal basic mobility, which is the concept of, well, you tell me, what describe for me UBM.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll just give you some backstory. I was introduced to the concept of universal basic mobility the first time I met a gentleman named Alex Roy, who I met. We had dinner, and we were just sort of exchanging our ideas around autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles.
What year was this, by the way?
This was the the beginning of this year. So January 2019 or February 2019. Great. And I mean, that we just gelled on that topic, and sort of have been, I've been using that in my work and really framing what I'm doing with that work. And it's actually something that I'm now, and Alex started the conversation with the World Economic Forum, and I'm now talking to them about how we can prop this up as a global policy and solution for transportation, and actually solving a lot of, inequity in our society. So what the basic concept of UBM, universal basic mobility, is taking the concept of universal basic income and sort of just flipping it on its side. UBI is a great policy platform. Andrew Yang is running for president, standing on this platform. However, as we can see right now in our political situation, there's a lot of polarization. It's just not a political win. Okay, if Andrew Yang wins the presidency, I would love to be proved wrong. So UBM takes the concept of, actually serving everybody and turns it on its head and says, why don't we actually just invest in the infrastructure and the systems that will get everybody where they need to go, allow them to have the dignity of work, and actually increase the mobility of goods that, serves corporations, and it keeps our economy going. So it's an economic model or a policy platform for really serving the underserved in a way that also is an incentive for, let's say, the not underserved.
It's excellent, Dennis, because as we've said on this show, and we try to be as apolitical as humanly possible, okay? Whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left, whether you're independent, guess what? You hate traffic. If you're a human being, you hate traffic, okay? The vast majority of sane human beings do not like traffic. We want to get from point A, point B, or if you need to get from point A, B, C, D easily, we can all agree on that, and there are economic reasons behind that, and the amount of money that we lose in traffic and time and health. I think cars have caused a lot of the obesity problems in our country, and I think they can be blamed for many things. That's why I'm all for UBM.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
It's actually there's a study, and I can forward it. You can put it in the notes. There was a study that people that sit in a certain amount of
space
traffic on their way home increases the incidence of domestic violence.
Well, look, honestly, I'm not surprised to hear that.
And let's just, this, I think you and I inherently know that this also, there's this big number, let's say 40,000 people
a year
just
die,
in
right.
that were killed. So we gotta stop for it.
No, we're all on the same page here. But let me ask you a question,
Sure.
Courtney. Since you did, I loved what you did about tying the problem with universal basic income that Andrew Yang is proposing. And I agree with you. It's great in theory, but it's just not going to work in our politically polarization in our country. Do you think by having the word universal tied to mobility, that might kill it too? Because some people will just say, those are just a bunch of communists and socialists. Do you think there's a better way to brand it?
Well, might be.
Real quick, Rudy, that was a good question. That was going to actually be one of my questions to you. Great question. Okay. Nice job.
I like branding. I love marketing. I love telling stories. I want the betterment of society, but it's all about how you present it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I'm not saying this is standing and has to stand as universal basic mobility. You can call it what you want. Universal access. You can move it. You can spin it to whatever you want.
I'd get rid of the word universal. You want to know why? Well, you got to bring some kind of like you know what you do? Free movement.
No, that's adopting the Andrew Yang freedom dividend.
To be fair.
Okay, so this would be my contention. So first off, the axiom of universal basic mobility. One of the things that I love about it is the fact that you are empowering somebody to work, right?
Amen.
In which I do believe that by working, you are giving meaning to somebody's life.
Yep.
I would be on the opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to UBI between you two, but nonetheless, on the universal side, I do think that when it comes to UBM, because infrastructure and traffic and getting around is very localized, I wonder if local basic mobility would be a better identification for it.
I mean, and let's talk about the concept of what we want to address, right? Let's work from that root. So basically it can address, it starts to, let me back up. What we want to address means there needs to be money put in a line item somewhere in a federal budget.
Government finance, baby, right here, baby, right here.
So what is the number one issue today with our transportation system? Infrastructure.
Amen.
So the UBM platform can actually take care of that, right? So our bridges are falling apart. Our transit system is like, there's no investment in it. Amtrak, at least in Pittsburgh, I'm not going to take it for 9 hours to get to New York City. I can drive faster. The concept of UBI doesn't address the fact that, I mean, for me, it's just still subsidizing personally owned vehicles because you're giving people money, but you're not changing the way they get around. So we're not actually, having a trickle down effect throughout the whole economy.
So
she's right.
Courtney, I just want to add that, and this is a compliment. You are the female version of this gentleman here.
Yeah,
you two are so in line with not just what you think, but even how you say it.
I love this conversation. She's absolutely right. You know what she said? You know what the problem? You know what she said?
Infrastructure.
She said the problem is the infrastructure. But you see, it's not that. The problem is with the financing. The number one way that we finance on a national level infrastructure in this country, guess what? It's the gas tax. And the gas tax, you need to drive more in order to get more money into the highway trust fund. Okay, here's the issue with the gas tax. Thankfully, cars are much more fuel efficient these days. So you'd think that our our congressmen would have thought, well, let's peg this thing to inflation. They never did. They haven't changed it since the 1990s. And as our cars have become more fuel efficient and there's been more electric vehicles.
Sitting at 18 cents right now?
There's a large breakdown that we can put into the show notes. I actually have it broken down. So the number one problem is the gas tax. Other ways to finance infrastructure and roads throughout this country, here in California, we have sales taxes tied to very specific county transportation programs. Now, in Los Angeles, we've passed 4 measures, and we have a sales tax that we're using to build out our transit system. But the reality is it's just not enough. We need to rethink how we finance infrastructure. That's what Courtney's saying. Is that correct, Courtney?
Well, I'll also say here in Pennsylvania, where we're a Commonwealth, the financing of our transit system, think of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, was being funded through basically tolls on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Well, the trucking industry sued the Turnpike and said, you can't use your toll money to fund transit. And so now they're stepping that down. Where does that money come from?
I think that's always going to be the fundamental issue with how funds come from, let's say, specifically the federal government and how they get trickled down to these cities. And then it's like, where exactly is the user in that system that is benefiting from from these subsidies?
Well, there's the federal system. Okay, so we have our interstate highway system, and we do have some transit programs that the feds fund. They got to be at a very major regional section. But you got to remember, there's also state and local. This is the federalist system. Sure. So each state can pass its own way of supplementing that money that they get from the federal government. The reality is we have to, exactly what Courtney is saying, everything is still based upon the personal vehicle. She's right. That's tied to the gas tax. We need to really revolutionize the way we're thinking about financing things.
Courtney, I want to get your thoughts on this here. Okay. So in doing research for UBM, there's not a whole lot of things that are available on this topic. However, I pleasantly came across an article yesterday that I do believe at the moment represents the most comprehensive article about UBM. And it was based, and listeners, I'll put a link for this article in the show notes. It was an article that came out July 30th, and it's by Daniel Comeau, French dude.
Dude, I can't pronounce that. Anything with an X in the name, forget it. I can't pronounce it. I'm terrible at it.
David Comeau.
Oh, that was probably pretty good.
Actually, say that one more time.
David Comeau.
That's that dude's name. She just said it.
Right
she totally just said that.
So he's a grad student at Harvard Kennedy, and he wrote in the Kennedy School Review. And so it's called Movement Matters, Why We Should Commit to Universal Basic Mobility. And again, it's...
Oh my God, I didn't even know about this study.
Well, it just came out. And again, I think it's brilliant in a lot of ways because there's a lot of it, as you had said, it seems like, which... Kudos to a gentleman like Alex Roy, who seems like he's the one that created this, and the idea is stuck to him. However, it was, a lot of the things that were talked about with UBM were more in its conceptual phase. I think that what Daniel has done here is that he's been able to tie in a lot of local policy, local legislation, local or cultural things that are going on that apply to UBM. And so one of the comments he made here, and again, I want to get your thoughts on this, is he said, by adopting UBM, policymakers would commit to provide every resident with access to the transportation services they need to achieve a baseline level of success.
That's spot on.
Okay.
That's great language. Thank you.
Right. So tell us, when you hear this, give us an idea of what is this baseline level of success.
Okay, this is my Ford City of Tomorrow project. This is something, it's a very hyper-local project dealing with a hyper-local issue that goes under the umbrella of UBM and can serve as a pilot, an example. So if you think about in any city, in the city of Pittsburgh, we have a very large hospital system, UPMC, University of Pittsburgh, essentially, medical center, and they're the largest employer in the region. Now, they have a really big problem with retaining their night shift workers. You know what the problem is?
They can't get home safely.
transportation disconnections. So let's think this through. Night shift workers at hospitals, what kind of jobs do you think those are?
Working in the
Nurses.
like the hospital morgue.
You think
I'm
people only
going
die?
da-
You
I'm
think people
going
only
dark.
die at night?
I'm going dark,
Yeah,
man.
You
I mean,
serious? You could die any time of the day.
I know. Sorry.
Well, let me paint the picture for you. If I went to a hospital, the number one thing that I would care about is that hospital is clean.
Oh,
yeah.
Of course.
Hygienic.
Yeah.
So night shift workers are typically cleaners.
Okay.
And so they're, lower socioeconomic bracket. And they also have been pushed out of the city here as rents have completely taken off with the tech boom in Pittsburgh. And there is a big issue in terms of connections in our transit system, because a lot of those, more women than men, night shift workers don't necessarily own private,
they don't have their own cars.
Or, they don't feel safe taking transit at night, or because they have to wait at two different stops just to get all the way into Oakland.
It's terrible.
At night or at 4 a.m. So I think I made my point there. What the City of Tomorrow project called Safe Shift, that I am working on in partnership with the City of Pittsburgh, and the data aggregator is a company called Move It, is to understand where those women are coming from and figure out how to use the latent assets of the Port Authority. So latent transit assets at night.
What is that? What
are those? Assets that are not used at night. What are assets that would not be used at night? Would be our paratransit vans.
Okay.
So we have these paratransit vans that are not used at night. We can activate those and create a system where we can go pick up those women and get them to work, and also have micro transit lines for the general public to use. Now, there's a lot of elements here, and I forgot to mention, I somehow jumped off without saying what the big issue that UPMC it's a financial issue, right? So with our argument to get the City of Tomorrow challenge grant was basically corporations are losing billions, like $39 billion in retention across the globe. So and the number one issue is transportation, right? Think about people that are not even, that they wanted to stay working at home. If they have the skill set to be, a data worker. But some people don't have those skill sets, and we still need those people who clean the hospital and take care of elderly people. So it's a financing issue. So my goal is to actually show that the cost of going to creating a system that these women can get to work safely and on time, using the actual transit system, can create a delta, a change in that retention number locally here at UPMC, and hopefully that can then incite UPMC to somehow start to subsidize transit, maybe.
What are you finding? What are you finding right now in terms of this research that you've how long have you been doing, kind of looking into this?
So it started in October last year, 2018. Okay. We were awarded, won the challenge November 2018. And then, of course, it took a long time to get into contracting with Ford. And we had some, musical chairs happening across different organizations. And so we're really digging into the data and the economics and, really trying to reach out to the workers.
Courtney, are you able to get like whatever, I don't know how that data is extrapolated or whether it's through surveys or anything, but are you actually able to get proof, evidence, whatever it is, to show, the reason why we're quitting our jobs at night is because of the transit system? Like Do you do that by asking a survey? How is that done? How is that data even created? I just, for my own edification.
That has to be, I mean, that would not be something that I would do. That's an academic, statistical job that it has been done around HR, human resources.
Okay.
And so it's sort of, taking from that and working with the HR department at UPMC and talking to their night shift managers and what anecdotally they're hearing, right?
Yeah.
Then I have to go and survey those workers. And, I've been in touch with people, and I really need to, I just had a meeting this morning. The issue right now is UPMC is so large that the right hand does not talk to the left hand. So getting a survey approved to go to employees has proven to be very difficult.
Yeah, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, must be a nonprofit, correct? It's a nonprofit corporation.
That's funny you should ask. They are a nonprofit.
Now the reason why I asked that is because of my day job, right? I'm a municipal finance lawyer. Not only do I help, I know. I trust me. I'll give you some coffee. You can stay up later. For that. But not only do we help governments issue municipal bonds, but we also help hospitals and other nonprofits throughout the entire country access the tax-exempt municipal bond market. What does that actually mean? Why am I even bringing that up? Well, because it is a nonprofit, and because probably a lot of the stuff that they use to finance is they have to be eligible for tax exemptability. It does provide for some restrictions as to the use of tax exempt municipal bond funds. So it's like it's this strange dance that these nonprofits got to do. It's like, are we a private corporation?
All of that does not make sense to me. I'm a line item.
I know. But you see, that's the difficult. That's the
taxes policy.
That's the difficult thing. That's why everything comes back down to finance. It drives so many things, and it's very important. Now, in taking care of your employees and making sure that they're safely come to and from work, I would imagine that the tax code would imagine that that's a part of what a nonprofit's supposed to do, but it could just be so much outside of it, or it's very gray where they're like, look, like we just don't have the money to spend on that. That's the difficult thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Why you have to say, this is why you have to sort of be, my goal is to compel the employer that it's a financial benefit to them, that they're investing in
absolutely
decreasing the loss over here by investing over here.
So is it fair to say, if going back to the original question of what would you define as a baseline level of success for UBM, am I fair to say your assessment would be the loss of turnover, turnover to a company by not providing services to, in this case, night workers of University of Pittsburgh Medical Center?
I would say the baseline is just frictionless mobility, being able to get where you need to go intuitively, affordably, and safely.
So, okay, let me along those lines, in terms of some kind of system that flows seamlessly and making it frictionless. I'd like to engage both of you on this discussion, because again, I would definitely say that I would be on the other side of the aisle that would want to be convinced about this. So let me refer back to Daniel's article. He says this concept of mobility as a service, okay, in which this is kind of what we're talking about here in terms of all different forms of transportation kind of tied into one. So that's mobility as a service. This concept, mobility as a service, has even been adopted at a citywide scale in Helsinki, Finland, where residents can purchase monthly passes through WIM, a single app that integrates public transit, taxis, and car sharing options. So, So if let's say if MAS, mobility as a service, would be kind of deemed as UBM light, would you agree that this is like UBM light, because this is, it's not a full scale adoption of it. It's done in Helsinki. It's localized. This is UBM light. Yeah. What would be?
I'll go with it.
Okay, go with it. Go with it. And again, I would love to hear your thoughts in counter to it. What would be the, UBM regular?
Well,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I would say, what's missing from that piece from the MOS is just a tool to get there.
Mm-hmm.
What I can't see in Helsinki is where is the concentration of people that need to get to this employment center? Where is the concentration of, doctors where the elderly need to get to, or, any person needs to get to, and can they safely cross the intersections to get there? I think that's also an element. We're talking about higher level things, infrastructure.
Yeah, I see.
More abstractly, but I really think that it comes down to, can everybody get to where they need to go on any mode safely, intuitively, and frictionlessly, and alive, I should say, at even the pedestrian scale.
Yeah.
So that means designing from that viewpoint, and also designing the financing that can enable that.
Yeah, I agree with her 100%. And the number one word that I agree with her on it is safety. So it's not just well, here's a card and now you can just access everything. It's the creation of the new streets. It's the creation of the pedestrian bridges. It's the creation of dedicated lanes for alternatives to cars where people really feel safely. It also is maintenance. Just because you created it doesn't mean that it's going to stay in existence. Somebody's got to pay for the maintenance of that, maintenance of streetlights at night, maintenance of the roads, maintenance of the protection of there. How that is UBM Lite, because what that is a card that you can access all of these things.
Or not just a card, but again, it's that single tool that unifies the car, the transit, the micromobility.
Here's what I think is missing, and maybe this is UBM on steroids. As a citizen, as somebody who pays their taxes, as somebody who, does what you're supposed to do, every month I get up to $100, $200, $300, $500 on this card to use on services other than my own personal car. Meaning, if I get rid of my personal car and I'm not, beating up the roads with my own car, some kind of subsidy, almost like a social security type thing. That's what, when I think of UBM, it is
That's interesting.
UBM on steroids. It's the, well, here's your card that you can use. And here's the certain amount that you can use. Anything over above that you need on the basic level, you got to pay for yourself. That's what I would think. What do you think about that, Courtney?
I think what I think underscores all of that is collaboration across transportation stakeholders to have a unified system that is interoperable. And I would say that it's not. I don't want to ham on this. There's a card to utilize the system, because you should be able to you should be able to walk. You should be able to get on a bus without having to pay for it. Why do you need a card? We should be investing in what gets us around, right? Why do I have to pay to get to my job? I mean, I don't, because
I see. She's taking it to a super duper level where I get it. I see it. I get your point.
Well,
that's truly UBM on steroids.
No, well, actually, I think you actually bring up now another fundamental question that needs to be asked, and that is, for a long time, and you could even say till this day that this still remains true, the talks with UBM is changing this conversation, but driving has always been considered a privilege. But now through UBM, it seems like not just driving, but mobility should be a right. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a human right. It should be a human right. Yes, absolutely. That's sort of
transportation is freedom. You hear me say that all the time. I write science fiction stuff about the withdrawal of transportation. I mean, I think transportation is at the core of everything. So yes, it is a human right. I mean, it really, really is. If you can't move, if you can't go anywhere, if you restrict somebody's ability to move, i.e. put them in a jail, then you've taken away their human rights.
Well, let's also just talk about politically how this is more, I would say, problematic than UBI, because if you're investing in the UBM concept, whatever it is ending up being called, you're then investing across line items, right?
Yeah.
So you're not just getting one line item and creating a whole new system, government system to implement it. You're just fueling the systems that already exist to be enhanced. And I think we need to focus on how do we modernize and give citizens access to that. What do you want to call it? Universal mobility? I don't have the other term, but frictionless mobility. In a
frictionless
way that,
mobility.
That's it.
We're
Yeah,
copyright that before she does.
I will. I'm going to send my text right now to my lawyers.
Thanks.
Yeah, frictionless mobility.
Tweet it.
I own it now. Hashtag it. If I hashtag it first, Courtney, it's mine. You know that.
I think ultimately it's human centered. But this is just, I think, also a counterbalance to what we're seeing right now in how investments are being made into autonomous vehicles, into scooters, into, there's also a huge contingent of sort of the transit investment and really understanding the geometry of the road and how we can actually move people about more efficiently. I mean, I feel as a cyclist who was on the board of the local advocacy group here called Bike Pittsburgh years ago, for me, the cycling message that in advocacy that we've been looking for the last 20 years has now been given like the people that want the things that we want, which is, different modes, different lanes for different modes on the actual road, not just cars. It's just blown up. I mean, it's like everyone is concerned. We need safe places for these scooter riders to be. They need to wear helmets. Yep. We need to also deal with cyclists and all these other MIDI and micro modes that are coming out. So we're sort of exploding this other modal concept and understanding that, hey, if we have these scooters and then we can get everyone to use transit, or people want to use their bikes and they can bring them onto transit, like, what do we need all these cars for? And then you have the whole robo-taxi model that's coming in. And I've been talking to people that work in the AV industry about, and it's funny because the people that I've talked to have actually said to me when I tell them my thoughts, I never even thought of that. And that's the issue of how most people get around, because if you're thinking about women with children and elderly, that's going to be a larger group of people than the other parts. And they're moving around in this trip chain, right? So they're moving around, chaining trips together. So how does the robo-taxi model fit with that? Not just the executives and the young people who want to have a safe way to get home at night, and the executives who don't want to ride transit and want to be chauffeured around, but like, how do you solve for that using robo-taxis? How do you solve for that using transit? How do you solve for that using micro-mobility? Because micro-mobility right now, in the commercial fashion, does not address families or movement of more than just one independent person.
We've talked about this. Kelly and I have talked about this here. As we're parents, and I spend a lot of time because the nature of my wife's job. She's a surgeon. She goes in early and she's trapped at a hospital all day. So I spend a lot of time ferrying my children around or taking my children around, either with my nanny or without my nanny. It's extremely difficult to just call an Uber or to use a robo-taxi, and I don't have any quote unquote micro mobility options. The reason why, Courtney, I still have my car, this is the truth, is because I have very young kids. Otherwise, I'd get rid of my car.
I bought a car. I didn't have a car before. I had my bike.
Yeah.
I had to buy a car to feel like, I can move. I mean, and I have such a inner conflict in my mind. Every day I struggle with, do I get in the car because I feel safer, even though it's not changing the system. And, I really just want to get my daughter places safely, but I don't want to have to drive. I don't like driving.
You and me both. I talk about this all the time on the show. The inner conflict that I deal with drives me crazy. And I say it on every single episode. I have a 2009. People are like, when are you going to get a new car? I'm like, I'm not. When my kids, I'm going to drive this car.
As a matter of fact, you should get rid of it at some point.
Yeah, I will. I will get rid of it. When my kids, I know when I'm going to. The plan is to get rid of it, but I totally agree with you. As a parent, that's the only reason why I personally have a car.
Okay, so I also want to point out that we, I think my background has allowed for me to be fortunate enough to have a lot of friends that are progressive in their policy ideas, and we can talk about these things. But the mainstream isn't. So, right. For example, I was completely disappointed to see, and I love Bill and Melinda Gates. They are single-handedly or joining hands and changing the world. And I was disappointed to see a post that she made on LinkedIn talking about co-parenting with Bill. And wasn't it so great that he actually took the kids to school? They have this 30-minute drive to school, and for her, she needs to take care of all these other things at the home. And Bill was like, it was just it was like giving him I don't know, like a
kudos for being a parent, like that's what you're supposed to do.
Oh my God, my husband's going to drive my kids a half an hour to school so he can have these really interesting conversations and quality time with his kids. And I'm thinking that there's such a problem with that thinking to me, that you can only get quality time with your children while you're transporting them 30 minutes away to a private school, and you're not engaging with your community and the people around you at all. And also the concept that it is to be even notable and, pointed out that it is a noble effort for a father to take their children to where they need to go.
I walk my kids to school, and I talk to the neighbors. I walk them. I don't drive them. I only drive them when they go, No,
but I just think, Melinda has a huge global platform. And in 2019, for that to be the case, that to me speaks of a traditional mindset. And so we have not moved forward or broken that yet.
We have more.
We're talking about the richest man in the world.
Well, Courtney, I think one of the interesting things that you had said there too was, and you guys obviously deal with this as parents yourselves, is when you are transporting your child, and specifically, let's say to a school. I mean, that is time with your child. That if the car itself, if the infrastructure, if it's just designed for parents and kids to stay silent in the car, and it doesn't kind of provide some greater interactions, then it's almost a missed opportunity for parents and child to interact with one another during this stretch.
Yes.
Right. And so let's talk about, we're talking about a family commute.
Yeah. Right.
So, or for, in my case, a single parent commute. So I have to get my child to school. So I typically either threw her on the back of my bike or would walk with her. And I found that walking with her, it actually, allowed for her to wake up more in the morning. We would point things out along the way. She would be revved up when we got there, rather than just sort of falling asleep in a car because it's so early in the morning, But then you have to think about the timing of how the whole system is set up. How do I then walk my child to school and then move on to where I need to go to work? In a lot of cases, and as a single parent, single moms are taking their kids on a bus to a daycare center in the opposite direction of where they actually need to be going.
Yeah.
So they're taking more than those 3 different transfers to get to their job, because they also have that pre-work commute of getting their child somewhere else. I mean, it's just, with the trip chaining for, taking care of each other as humans, with doctors and pharmacists and getting people to social situations. You also have, that's the trip chaining, but you also have the pre-commute that parents have to deal with that hasn't really been talked about. I mean, you can't send your kid walking to school or to daycare when they're, 3 to 4 years old. It's just not acceptable. And it's not socially acceptable to have your kids walk to school until they're, I think it's 9, 10, or 11 now. And I used to walk to school when I was 6. Right. So we're really dealing with car usage in new ways that we used to not have to.
Yeah.
This reminds me of our episode with Brian Biniak.
Yeah.
And
Connected Travel.
Connected Travel, and what they're doing with Honda cars, in which they're trying to connect more passengers with the driver. And so therefore there's tools that they're allowing kids specifically to engage in. Now, I don't think they were on the educational end of things. I think they were more on like playing games and then also just being able to have this like omnichannel experience. But still, the concept of at least on the automaker side, developing technology that would increase interactions between passengers and drivers, it's not, the conversations are definitely not being talked about regularly, but hopefully we'll see more of that.
The thing that, and it raised us during our episode with Connected Travel, is they're dealing with the reality of today. We still have cars on the road. That is still the primary mode of getting around. It's the primary mode of parents moving things around. Why not make it as entertaining as possible? Totally get that. Yeah, it's there. Why not utilize it? I think what Courtney is advocating, and what I have also been advocating for, is fine, that's where we're at now, but we really need to start working on redoing our infrastructure, to changing our mindsets, because if we can make the changes now, it'll be cheaper and better, and it won't take as many generations to have people rechange their minds about everything. But I got nothing against trying to make a car entertaining. I just personally don't want to use a car, but that's me. I totally get it.
Well, Courtney, I want
personally, I want more people out of cars. It's just, it's
Amen.
a better place.
You are a spitting image. I feel like I'm seeing Rudy right now. I have Rudy to my.
The thing that we have to also realize is we can't leave the people who rely on getting around in their cars out of this. So
Yes.
took my daughter. I took my daughter to Paris for her spring break. We've been saving up for years to go.
That's why you know that last name of Daniel. Come on.
I wanted to give her sort of the sort of transportation standard, like the goal that we want to get to, that I know right now in a beautiful city. Also she loves fashion and the Eiffel Tower, and so that worked for her. When I was there, it was when all the yellow jacket protests were going on, and I saw people taking scooters and car to goes, and they were burning them in the middle of the street, and there were all these streets shut down, and the yellow vests were coming out, and the yellow vests represented people that lived out of the city, and they have to rely on their personal vehicle because that's how we've designed things to work. They were it was all about the taxing of the policy there. So we have to build a policy that also works for people that are in the situation where they have to rely on a vehicle because of the land use patterns that we have designed them into, while also creating an incentive for the developers to readdress that out there and create new solutions to bring them into UBM.
So, Courtney, you just literally hit the nail on the head as to why I am on the Wisco Weekly podcast rather than any other podcast that's out there. This podcast, the history of it used to be solely automotive, car dealer, car buying focused. Okay, that's the historical, because that was Dennis's background. We're friends. We're from high school. I started going on his show and I started saying all of this crazy stuff that you and I are talking about now, and the show and our audience has evolved as this discussion is brought up. And I know Dennis is now using other modes of transportation other than a car. And I'm hoping, audience members out there, I'm really hoping that you guys are at least thinking about not just using a car to get around. Use the train, use a scooter if you feel safe doing it, carpool more, ride share. We just want people that love their cars to think about them differently. So we are here, and we do try to include people that own cars and that are thinking about buying a car as a part of this discussion, because they're vitally important.
Yes, they are important. And I would also add to that, Rudy, that the onus also has to be on road managers and employers to help be part of that conversation, to change the way that we move around, to allow for people to feel safe and comfortable, and have a frictionless way to get from A to B to C to D to F, not in their vehicle.
Amen.
I got to tell you, I am thoroughly pleased with the information that has been gathered here today, because either from talking about it through not just your eyes, but like you have actually opened my eyes to, a particular audience that, it's not just the low income, right? Again, I think when we start to bring up a lot of the senior citizens, I can't help but think of my parents and making sure that my parents, like I would want my parents to make sure that while they are in their sunset years of their life, that as they become a little bit more physically disabled, that their life does not become an inconvenience. And so you have opened my eyes to that, and I like the fact that we've kind of talked about some of the different players in what would need to take place in UBM. Be it the policymakers, be it just general people like myself, who, it's hard to convince someone like myself to not use a car anymore because I've been using it for all eternity, and I understand the consequences of my actions.
And the world's been designed for you to do that.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So,
and financed for you to do that.
Well,
she just brought it all back together, baby. She brought it all back together. She brought it home.
We can say that for another episode. We'll say that for another episode. Courtney, do you have any last thoughts you would like to share with us?
I just think that we're at a really interesting moment in our transportation system and our the fourth industrial revolution, with, automated vehicles and, people in cities planning for the future of automated vehicles, and this disruption of micromobility on the streets that is completely blowing up how the largest real estate asset that we all own as tax-paying citizens is being used. And I really think and hope that we can, come to a middle ground that does not just see roads prioritized for cars.
Well, here, I definitely would be more pro UBM than, for instance, UBI. So I love these discussions, and Courtney, please, I'm speaking on behalf of Rudy because I know before this, we would be happy to look at this more, help out with looking at UBM and what it would take to have more mass adoption. So please share with us, talk with us.
And I'm just talking about it to, I really want to spread the word, and it's a concept of just let's get people to think differently about this. And maybe there'll be a presidential candidate in the future that takes the UBM platform.
Amen.
President Wisco? President Ehrlichman?
Yeah.
Definitely no President Salo.
President Ehrlichman. Come on. Let's go.
I said that. I said
I would go for President Ehrlichman.
I said
no President
Wisco.
President, she's got that chair. I love that chair, by the way. I wish we could talk about how you got it, but we won't bring that up. I love that chair.
Listeners, if you're tuned in on the podcast side, be sure you check out YouTube. If you're on YouTube, be sure you check out the podcast side. Courtney Ehrlichman, thank you for joining Wisco Weekly. Listeners, be sure you check out the episode notes to follow Miss Ehrlichman around. Courtney, I hope to have you back again very soon to talk about some of the research and the work that you're doing to report back to us how UBM is factoring out in Philadelphia, or I'm sorry, in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania.
Oh my God!
I know. Wow, I just ended it on that note.
You want to re-say that?
So no. I like to keep his mistakes on here so I can hold them over his head. Nope, absolutely not. You said it.
Listeners, on behalf of Kelly, Rudy, and myself, cheers, prost, lachaim, kipis, nastravi, salud, kampai, mabruk, tutsins, gambe, yamas, nastrovie, to the customer experience.
L'chaim. Thank you guys for having me.